This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 236 of the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network. In this episode, I'm sharing a clip from an interview with my colleague, Tom Parton, who is a retired speech pathologist, or I would say partially retired because he is still very active in doing a lot of advocacy work in Illinois, and he has done some amazing things as far as just reading advocacy and his work as an SLP throughout his entire career. The original interview is episode 178, Are We Allowed to Say Dyslexia in the Schools? And I wanted to pull out this clip about assistive technology and how we want to think about technology in general. When is it appropriate to use technology for accommodations? How do we make sure that kids can effectively use technology, which has been a conversation for many years. Back in the early 2000s, I was thinking about it when I first started in the schools, but as we have been inundated with more technology and kids have more technology accessible to them, which is a double-edged sword for a lot of different reasons, I think it's very important that we think about what skills we need in order to effectively use technology, when it's appropriate to use an accommodation, what times it might be appropriate to use a device versus not use a device at all to build some of these skills, especially when it comes to accommodations and preparing kids for life. So the overview of the conversation, we talk a little bit about the mandates relating to dyslexia. Tom shares some of the advocacy work that he has done. And in this clip specifically, in the conversation, we also talk about the problem with giving up on word decoding just because kids are in high school, how many of these students who are still not readers by the time they get to high school can make progress, how important it is to have those literacy skills in life beyond school. We can't just say kids have access to technology, so they don't need to learn to read and write, and how we want to take that advantage to use their educational experience to build those skills, and not just thinking about, well, kids need to be more in the curriculum when they're older, and we're not focusing on word decoding, how that can be problematic and actually impact kids' ability to access the curriculum. With the conversation about technology, though, which is what I've pulled out in this clip, I think it seems that people swing in different directions. In the work that I do right now, where I am specifically involved in building a product that is going to enable state workers to use technology to do their jobs and having interactions with people who are out working with families and then having conversations with people who are building these systems, there definitely seems to be a lot of strong opinions on one side or the other. And I see these opinions as I interact with my colleagues in the education space as well. So on one side, there are professionals with the clinical expertise and the knowledge of how kids learn to read and learn these cognitive skills, feeling skeptical and worried about the impact of technology on brain development, on some of these skills where, and back back in the day in the schools, kids were learning things without devices. And I think those concerns are very legitimate. And then on the other side, there are people who are very excited about the possibility for technology. And what that results in is just this confusion about where is it appropriate to use technology for learning, and where is it appropriate to use technology for accommodations, and when is it helping and when is it hindering. So Tom shares some specific examples of how kids need, kids and both our adolescent and younger students as well, kids need a certain level of skills to be able to use things like screen readers, to be able to do an internet search and scan and look at different things on a page, on a device, when they are using some kind of technology for doing research. We initially would say Googling, but now we should probably saying using things like ChatGPT to gain information. So there's the reading aspect, and then of course there's the critical thinking aspect of being able to evaluate the information that you have and that you're getting from the device. So obviously, if kids have comprehension issues and if they have decoding issues, it's going to be difficult for them to effectively use a lot of these technologies available. So we can't just make this assumption that kids shouldn't be working on word decoding just because they're older. Because if they do not have those skills, it's going to hinder their ability to evaluate and put the correct inputs into their searches and things like that, which that's beyond what we talk about in this conversation. But what Tom shares is actually something that has been a relevant question for many years before we had ChatGPT and before everyone was Googling everything, which is just being able to effectively use some of the assistive technology that we have for individuals who might need reading accommodations. So definitely recommend checking out this clip of the conversation where we talk about the nuances and how do we effectively prepare kids to use some of these technologies. And my personal biggest concern when it comes to technology, and especially when we're thinking about younger kids, is the ability for kids to have that opportunity to put pencil to paper and form letters and be able to physically interact with books. Obviously we have the word decoding aspect, but then we also have the being able to interact with a book and know what to do with it. And that's difficult if you're doing it on a device. There's, of course, the challenge with book deserts, which I discuss in episode 235, but I think it's really important for those of us who are working on reading to understand those conversations, especially when it comes to some of those older students who are non-readers or have limited reading proficiency when they're in high school. Again, we can't just ethically say, well, they're not going to be able to learn to read because it's too late for them, or they don't need to read because they have access to technology, or we need to switch over to project-based learning or vocational training because they're older. Their ability to benefit from those things, as well as the use of technology during those things, is going to be impacted if we don't have that solid word decoding to make sure that they are able to benefit from the higher level instruction or the vocational training or the use of assistive technology and accommodations. So before we get going, I wanted to remind you that if you are interested in building a system that will support these language and literacy skills, if you are a professional who is working on language and you want a better system for your language intervention, check out Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that was designed for SLPs who want a system for language therapy. To learn more about that program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Now, please enjoy this clip from my conversation with Tom Parton. I'd love to go back to the topic of, okay, so we have students who are in secondary school. And I don't know if you experience this, but there's this pressure of, well, we're working on comprehension now. We're done working on decoding. And, the whole point of reading is comprehension. So why aren't we working on that? But then if you have a student who is in high school and they can't read the word fever, and they've got this complex text that they can't necessarily decode all the words or write the words in their assignments or all those things, how is that going to impact their ability to access their curriculum, to benefit from different assistive technology that might be made available to them? So yeah, let's discuss that.
That'll take the rest of the time.
About 20 questions there. But yeah, I think I want to address the curriculum, and we can talk about what Wilson is, but then also the use of technology, because
Sure.
that's something that comes up too with accommodations.
And as Dr. Snow had mentioned on one of your previous podcasts and called these kids instructional casualties, Dr. Jane Fell Green, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, labeled these students curriculum casualties. And I think that's a perfect term and a descriptor. So what happens is, for those that, it tends to be kindergarten through second grade that the teaching of reading goes on. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people, educators, professionals, that believe once that window is passed, it has passed. Those students will not learn to read. And we need to keep them in the curriculum. And that's what often happens as we look at student placement and supports for classes, et cetera, as they go through, especially in high school. I guess there's a lot more of that, but it does start to happen. I was involved with a couple of very bright students who got put in a special ed class because their decoding was so bad, and it was so bad.
Yeah.
They had no reason to be in an instructional special ed classroom. They were non-decoders, and therefore couldn't write. Their spelling continues, they're young men now. Their spelling continues to be abysmal. And what I would tell those students, as I worked with them, there are different reading scores. It can't be, we do a disservice when we say they're at a blank level. Say whatever level you will, and we can discuss all those different ways of doing that. But there is comprehension, and there's listening comprehension. So if they have access to the accommodations, yes, they can be at a college level comprehender. And I have worked with and identified that level of kid with dyslexia. But you give them text to read. You give them words non-contextually, so a list of words. Mm-hmm. And these students that I worked with from 6th grade through 12th grade, it's a good illustration. Receiving support in middle school did not really move their decoding skills in terms of word reading, non-contextualized word reading. I got them to a 6th grade level, but that was 4 years of work, and they were in, they took 3 years of classes with me in terms of the work of decoding and the Wilson and the other program. Mm-hmm. So that's 3 years of every day, and they took that as an elective, but they also had full access to the curriculum, which they should have had. Mm-hmm. So it's where those decisions come into play. When I first started putting together the reading program at the high school, I was looking, and I reported to the administration every year the growth of these students, because A, I wanted to protect that program, and B, and it was so empowering to the students to get that feedback. But I wanted to prove these kids can still learn. And these kids, at 9th grade, 10th grade. I had one student enroll as a 12th grader. He was heading into college. He had to put up with some freshmen who were not happy to be in the class. And so I really felt sorry for the student. But in some of his assessment, standard assessment, he went up 2 standard deviations. So he was much more aware. He was a much better user of that assistive technology because as an independent reader, he was more effective and more efficient. So all of that work in college is going to be so much easier than if he had never received that instruction or the ability to develop his decoding skills. So there are different levels as we look at the different areas of the skills of reading. So the decisions need to be made. How do we continue to develop those foundational or deficit skills? And how do we continue to give them access to the curriculum so they can continue to be learners and can continue that? But it's often hard for individuals and systems to understand that dichotomy and to give time and resources that these students need to develop those skills. But to not do that, I think, and I'll probably, because I've worked with students, I'll probably sound over the top here, but it's unethical, it's malpractice to not work on those deficit skills when we know they can be improved, and to shove that aspect under the rug is not serving these students well. But they also need that access to all of that technology for their curriculum work.
What was when you say that your student was a better user of technology and accommodations, what type of technology was he using? And what did the decoding do for him? Like, how did that help to make him a better user of that tool?
A perfect example would be one that often tends to be given first, and that's word prediction software for writing.
Yeah.
Okay, so and I'm using this as an example. They used a variety of, and we were blessed in the district that I was at. We had a wonderful assistive tech, and they worked with the students, and we handed that off as much as we could so that the student learned what worked best for them. But in word prediction software, you begin to type a word, and it's such as what's on our phones now. If you're not in the ballpark, if you're trying to write the word physical, for example, and you put an F, well, it's not going to give you the physical PHY that you're looking for. So you have to be in the ballpark. And for a very impacted student with dyslexia or decoding difficulties, they may not even be in the ballpark.
Yep.
But then what they're given are 4 or 5 words. Those 4 or 5 words are visually similar, phonetically similar oftentimes. It is a nightmare as a dyslexic student if you give them word prediction software and then expect them to use that. That could be one of the worst decisions. It's meant well-intentioned, but it creates so much difficulty and anxiety and errors that it's not effective. I would use word prediction software later in my treatment or later in my therapy when we would decode the 4 or 5 words that were given, because that's a challenge because they do look so similar. But without those skills, then it's more difficult to manipulate the controls of assistive tech. Assistive tech on a website can be a nightmare with drop-down menus. Assistive tech with audio books, they may have different page numbers, and let's say in high school they want you need to search for quotes that a character gave and what page. Well, audiobooks, sometimes the page numbers are different than the page numbers that every other student in the class has. So there there are barriers to the use of assistive technology or needs that they're going to have to get through. The better they are, the more efficient they are at decoding for control, for revision, for review. I have not dug deep in the research, but if you're at a 3rd grade level of decoding words and you're at a 9th grade level of decoding words, all of those options and all of that text on the in assistive technology is going to be more effective because you are able to gain more for the reading that you do have to do using other tools.
I always wonder too. So, and this is the audiobooks. This topic is an interesting conversation, which I've gotten into in a couple other interviews, where obviously audiobooks are they're extremely helpful, especially for those students who need access to the language, the syntax, the vocabulary, and even just for engagement reasons. That it's frustrating if you're always reading at a level that doesn't allow you to read books that are interesting to you. So that I know there's a lot of good reasons to incorporate audiobooks. And I was discussing in another interview that they're not a replacement, but they're something that's in addition to the work with print. But the other thing that comes up is that if you're using an audiobook, or I know some people like to listen and read along, what if you also have issues with language and working memory? And if you're only listening to an audiobook, I personally have a hard time if I don't have the written symbols there. For me, the written symbols are a form of, I guess, maybe a form of technology. So it's visual for me. So I have a hard time processing if I'm just listening. So I always wonder, do we want to put students in a situation where they only have access to one mode? And yes, we want to give them flexible options as far as the mode, but yeah, I wonder how the decoding would impact the student's ability to make use of audiobooks as well.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's a visual support. And in all of this work as a speech language pathologist, what drew me to print and the use of print and curriculum is that it's static. It's there. It can be manipulated. It could be understood. When we do certain tasks or some of the supports for test taking, for learning, for memory, for those of us that have the code accessible, we use that. So name 20 animals as fast as you can in 30 seconds. Some people will run the alphabet to help understand.
I see the words in my head as in addition to the images. Like when I'm doing, self-talk and imagery, I do words and pictures.
These kids don't have that. They don't have that readily available, or if they do, it's on sand. It's not secure. So the aspect of audiobooks and reading along, again, every student, you've got to look to their profile, where they're at and what works for them and not, and the task at hand. What are they reading for? The students that I was talking about that I consulted with through junior high and then worked with in high school, they had very intelligent young men. They had probably the best vocabulary of even regular high school students. They had a love of history. One of them had a love of history and listened to audiobooks or was read to and had wonderful vocabulary. So there's that aspect of it opened up because that was his area of interest, that he was able to learn and enjoy and take in information via audiobooks. Curricularly, it depends on the task. What class are they in? Are they taking notes? Are they having notes provided? Web searches, prevent a number of obstacles. Research is really difficult for some of these students because if you think about, you type a term in that you want to research on a Google search or whatever, we scan. We scan the page. We scan and go, oh, that's an ad. Oh, that's about a movie that had that topic. We know suddenly that we don't even need to click.
Or what about even menus? I mean, those are, they're decontextualized. And yes, you can kind of, if you've seen a number of different menus, I'm just thinking I have my Google inbox over here where I don't have context clues. If I had never seen this menu before, I wouldn't know what this list meant.
And that's, yes, curricular menu, food menu. Oh yeah, these kids, there are many, many things that they have to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever played around with some of those screen readers that you can get on different web browsers. I get so confused because I'm like, wait, what is it reading right now? And it just reads it.
Yes.
Out of context, and you're trying to scan and follow along, and you got to be quick.
and that's why we can't just say, oh, they have accommodations, they're going to be okay. The use of that assistive technology, and we all use things to help us through the day, help us in work, but we figure out what works for us, and we figure out what doesn't. And these kids need instruction, support, reflection on that. I had one of the kids that I consulted with. He called me in May, and he was feeling guilty. He's looking at getting a new job, and with a new job are forms and applications.
Oh yeah.
And he's feeling really bummed that he needs to reach out to his dad. And should I need this level of support? And I told him, you don't need that level of support every day. You don't need it every month. But here is a point where you're being inundated with forms. You're going to need that support. One of our board members and everyone reading, when they went to get their COVID vaccine, you have a page to fill out. Her son was in college at the time, very dyslexic, very bright, had all the supports. He just handed the thing to her and was like, we're in a line. I will not be able to complete this prior to getting up there. So it's access to life, but it's also access to healthcare, access to jobs. It takes time and it takes exploration and support to explore what works for them and their needs.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all the resources that were mentioned in this episode. And be sure to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers put executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams using multiple service delivery models. So I show you how to do direct intervention, and I also show you how to coach and train others so that you can ensure students get support across their day. Remember that it helps me so much if you tell your friends and colleagues about De Facto Leaders, and if you follow me and leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify or another podcast network. And finally, if you're interested in collaborating with me, if you'd like to invite me to be on your podcast, if you would like to be a guest on De Facto Leaders, or if you have a suggestion for a guest for De Facto Leaders, please email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.